Right now, the Iraqi army is reportedly holding militants at bay in the city of Samarra, about an hour from the capital. Inside Baghdad, thousands of Shiite volunteers are now heeding the call from the government and local clerics, offering to take up arms against these Sunni sympathizers, ISIS. At the same time, we have new evidence of just what kind of enemy that these folks are going to be facing. Over the weekend, militants posted these graphic photos. They claim to show Iraqi soldiers being loaded into trucks and executed. NBC has not independently confirmed the photos, but an Iraqi military spokesperson tells the AP they believe they are genuine. Militants claim as many as 1,700 people have been killed. The State Department would not yet confirm that number. All this is putting increasing pressure on the administration to act. The question is how? In a Yahoo News interview just this morning, Secretary of State John Kerry said President Obama is reviewing a range of options that include possible drone.
They're not the whole answer, but they may well be one of the options that are important to be able to stem the tide and stop the movement of people who are moving around in open convoys and trucks and terrorizing people. I mean, when you have people murdering, assassinating in these mass massacres, you have to stop that.
As part of that effort, multiple publications are reporting that the U.S. is using unmanned surveillance aircraft to collect intelligence in Iraq. As you know, there isn't a lot of credibility or reliability that the U.S. puts into the intelligence that comes from Maliki's government. Democratic Senator Joe Manchin said the gathering of intelligence is a critical piece of any U.S. effort.
The airstrikes, technical support, drones, whatever it takes, but I want to make sure our intel is accurate before we start doing this. And I'm hopefully they're getting accurate intel on this. If not, it's all for naught.
At the same time, the U.S. is bracing for conflict inside Baghdad itself. The Defense Department confirmed that troops have been sent to protect U.S. diplomatic facilities in Baghdad and that some personnel have already been evacuated. In addition, the USS George H.W. Bush has now arrived in the Persian Gulf. And the Pentagon confirms that Secretary of Defense Chuck Hagel ordered the USS Mesa Verde into the Arabian Gulf. Now, the ship has completed its transit through the Strait of Hormuz, and it's basically there. But the U.S. is also trying to get its regional partners involved. On Sunday, Secretary of State John Kerry called his counterparts from Jordan, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE, asking for their help to keep Iraq from splitting apart and for their help in fighting these terrorists. The Republican chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, Mike Rogers, says they could play a critical role.
You can't fire missiles and then turn around and come home. It has to be a coordinated effort. That's why you have to have the Arab League with you. They have the capability and special forces and other things to impact certain parts of the battlefield. We should use that. We should help them do that.
Remember, getting the Arab League involved is what got the U.S. Off the sidelines with Libya. There's also the real possibility that Iran may be partners in this fight. This morning, Secretary Kerry said the U.S. is open to discussing the conflict with Iranian leaders. And a top official tells NBC those discussions could happen on the sidelines of this week's nuclear talks, which are ongoing, of course, in Vienna. Cooperation would benefit Iran, both in terms of diplomatic relations as well as its own security. ISIS has been one of the biggest threats to Iran over the last 10 years. And as the debate over Iraq heats up back here in the U.S., we've noticed a new talking point emerging. Those hesitant to get too deeply involved in Iraq are more likely to portray it as a sectarian fight. Those that are calling for a more aggressive response, particularly those on the right, insist that it's a fight against al-Qaeda. Check out the differences.
If you're up against an al-Qaeda affiliate, if you're up against those who will, and you're a secular force, those who will, commit suicide in the frontal attacks, you need air support.
This is more than just an obscure Shia-Sunni conflict. This is al-Qaeda. And al-Qaeda is not on the road to defeat. Al-Qaeda is on the march.
Obscure. That's right. Paul Wolfowitz used the phrase an obscure Shia-Sunni issue there. We're not sure that that's an obscure issue. Anyway, let's go on the ground here. NBC's chief foreign correspondent Richard Engel is now in Baghdad, and NBC's Ayman Mohyeldin is in Erbil in northern Iraq. Richard, let me start with you. You're in Baghdad. Do you sense that this is a city that's preparing for a battle?
Yes, I do, actually. I am right now in Firdous Square. If you remember Firdous Square, which is where that famous statue of Saddam Hussein was pulled down as U.S. troops, Marines came in and eventually toppled Saddam Hussein. Right now, we are seeing mostly the streets are empty. Not a lot of people. People are afraid. They are staying inside their homes. Prices are going up because some of the roads leading into the Capitol have been shut off because of the fighting. Food prices are up 50% in some cases. Fuel prices are also up. We've seen the Iraqi army deployed, not just in their bases, but putting their armored vehicles, their 50 caliber machine guns in front of the gates of their position. Heavy presence, military presence at the airport. We've been driving around Baghdad for the last 45 minutes or so. I've perhaps never seen the city this empty as it is right now. There's not fighting in the city. It doesn't feel imminently threatened. So far, after not fighting for about a week, when we just saw the Iraqi army collapsing, the soldiers stripping off their uniforms, now the government has launched a counteroffensive. It is using airstrikes, and it has also very significantly called up and enlisted the Shiite volunteers. The Shiite religious community, which in this country is critically important, has mobilized. And the clerics who are based in the city of Najaf, the holy Shiite city of Najaf, have issued a religious edict to fight to the death and authorize people to carry weapons, saying that if they died to defend the city, they will be secured a place in heaven. And so now we've got two groups that are preparing to resist ISIS, the militant group, should it come here. Both the government and the Shiite population, who are, aligned to each other.
Are you convinced, though, that ISIS will make a move toward Baghdad, or do they realize that that might be biting off too much, that they're better off sort of keeping their gains as is? Could we see more of a stalemate?
I think we could see a stalemate. I think before they tried to do any kind of assault on the city, which I think probably would be unsuccessful at this stage, they had initial momentum in the first few days. Now the government has woken up. I think if they tried to assault the city, they would probably fail. But what they might try and do is soften the city. Car bombs, attacks, little shoot-and-run attacks, assassinations, the kind of violence we saw in the worst days of the war in 2006 and 2007. That seems likely more than a charge like some sort of golden horde coming into the city and taking over Baghdad, as the Mongols did in the 13th century.
No, okay, and as it is with any dispute in the Middle East, hundreds of years of history always matters here. Anyway, Richard Engel in Baghdad now. Richard, thanks very much. Let me go to Ayman, who is in Erbil in northern Iraq. Ayman, you've watched this movement. You've seen what's going on. What's the latest on the ground there?
Well, the situation in Erbil from a humanitarian point of view continues to cause major concerns for international organizations as they try and alleviate some of this pressure that is building up with hundreds of thousands of Iraqis leaving the northwest part of the country. In addition to that, we are getting some news about the offensive by ISIS groups and affiliated groups that have pushed northwards of Mosul. They have now taken, as you mentioned, the city of Tel Afar, but more alarming, capturing the most senior Iraqi military official. And as we've seen in the past several days, according to the images that have been posted on these Al-Qaeda related websites, some of those officers and some of those military personnel are being executed in mass graves publicly. Now, we haven't confirmed that independently, but that is certainly causing enough fear here on the ground for people to believe they are true, and it is certainly stoking the flames of sectarianism even more. Now, a lot of the people we've been speaking to here on the ground, some of those that have left Mosul, are actually directing most of their anger towards the prime minister of the country, Nouri al-Maliki, for failing to address a lot of the sectarian issues over the course of the last several years. They say he single-handedly, backed by Iran, have led this country to these types of divisions.
And so what you're sensing from people is, as angry as they are at ISIS, they're also angry at Maliki. Where are they going? Where are they trying to find refuge?
Well, many of them have come here to the semi-autonomous Kurdish region that spans the entire northeast and north of their country. It's a lot safer. It's sealed up like a drum for the most part. It's very separate than the rest of the country. The Kurdish Peshmerga control the borders. They've been turning back some of the people, but they are allowing women and children and those with medical conditions. A lot of them are actually staying with relatives, apartments that they can get their hands on. Some of them are actually staying in refugee tents that have been set up by international organizations like the UN and others. But it's still certainly a major cause of concern for the officials here and across the country to see these large-scale, displacement of population centers across the northwest part of the country.
All right, Ayman Mohyeldin in Erbil, Richard Engel earlier in Baghdad. We've got our team on the ground all over the country. Thank you both. Joining me now, former U.S. Ambassador to Iraq, Chris Hill. Ambassador, good morning to you.
Morning.
Where do you expect the president to start thinking today? So here's what seems to be on the ground. There doesn't seem to be much movement on Maliki ready to make the political decisions that the U.S. wants him to make. And if he doesn't, will the president really not act?
Well, I think the president is right to link this to some political moves, but I'd be careful about this notion that Maliki is the only one who's failed to make political moves. I mean, the Sunnis have not exactly picked up offers from Maliki to have jobs because the job they really want is Maliki's job. So this is, it takes two to reconcile. So I'd be a little careful with the notion that this is all in Maliki's lap. So that's one point. The second point is that Maliki is getting external help, and that's from the Iranians right now, who are not making any political demands on Maliki. So one has to remember that with Iran, you have a bad Iran and a worse Iran, and what they've got there is a worse Iran in the form of Qasem Soleimani, the head of this Republican Guard formation. So I think it's very important that the U.S. be able to play a role here, and so I would hope that the president does move ahead on some of these military measures, and I, for one, believe it's highly necessary to really set back this ISIS crowd, who, by the way, are not particularly interested in Sunni outreach from Maliki.
That seems, they seem especially brutal considering what we've seen already in some of these pictures. But let's go to the Iran portion of this a minute. We're in the middle of negotiations about their nuclear technology. Frankly, it looks like that they're not going to get anywhere. They're going to extend the temporary agreement probably another 6 months at some point. Obviously, these things aren't supposed to be linked, but they're going to be linked. How do you do it without, is it so necessary to get Iran involved in Maliki and to sort of pull Maliki back that the U.S. does a little give on the nuclear talks?
Yeah, I think Secretary Kerry was right to say that we need to be in contact with the Iranians, but I wouldn't be trading off the nuclear talks for cooperation on the ground in Iraq. I think they're two separate, albeit related issues. So I think it's important that we continue on that nuclear track, and I think we've always had this kind of two-track approach. Remember, we had two sets of negotiations in Geneva, one very dedicated to the nuclear issue and one dedicated to the overall proposition that Iran needs to stop funding terrorist groups in the Levant and other parts of the Middle East. And so I think on that latter point, which I think is in some respects as tough as the nuclear point, because you get this kind of Republican Guard, this sort of mullatocracy very much engaged on these issues of Iran's role in the Middle East. It's also what really spooks some of our other allies, that is Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states, when they see Iran really connected into the internal situation in Iraq. So much to worry about, but I think we need to be active there, very active diplomatically, and as I said, I think we need to be prepared to be active militarily.
As with any debate on Iraq, you get a lot of revisionism, and everybody wants to almost relitigate old battles, whether you've been there in the first place or not. But I do want you to come down on one issue, which is this idea. Is this a Sunni Shia issue, or is ISIS an Al-Qaeda inspired group? Because I've noticed that the more intervention you want, I've noticed from lawmakers, the more likely they're to emphasize the Al-Qaeda portion and de-emphasize. I heard Paul Wolfowitz call it, this is not an obscure Sunni Shia issue, and I thought obscure is an odd word to use.
Yes, it is, and I think the answer to most multiple choice questions in the Middle East is all of the above. Clearly, there is a Sunni Shia problem region-wide. It really is pronounced in Syria. It's had to spill over into a very difficult situation in Iraq. So clearly, there's a Sunni Shia issue going on, but there's also, I think, an Al-Qaeda issue, and it's understandable why U.S. politicians, especially those who want to get more involved, why they market that. Now, I'm not sure that ISIS has the kind of global reach that Osama bin Laden did. But certainly, I mean, these are people who are not interested in compromise with anyone. But the first people they hate are the Shia, and then we come a close second.
All right, Ambassador Chris Hill, thank you very much. Always tricky there. Appreciate your insights. Republicans jockeying hard ahead of a key vote to replace Eric Cantor, plus Mitt Romney back in the